This lecture is on nephrons, part 1. So now we are talking about nephrons. So the working unit of the kidney is the nephron. And there are 1.25 million nephrons approximately in each kidney. So basically, nephrons are small. And both filtration, which we have discussed, and reabsorption, which we have also discussed. These both take place in nephrons. So the nephron structure and function. Blood from the renal artery. You remember the renal artery? That's the big artery that flows to the kidney. So blood from the renal artery then flows into millions of tiny arterioles, as happens to blood in arteries all over the body. Eventually you get down to the blood being in arterioles. So there is one arteriole per nephron. And the arteriole breaks into a series of capillaries. And this series of capillaries is called the glomerulus. But now this is different from what usually happens with capillaries. So the capillaries in the glomerulus then form a tight ball. So they don't spread out the way that capillaries usually fan out through a tissue, but rather they kind of all come together in a little ball like this, known as the glomerulus. And I'm just going to say briefly that the plural of glomerulus then is glomeruli, just so you know. So the glomeruli are in the cortex of the kidney. And each glomerulus is surrounded by and I think I will continue it up here. Each glomerulus is surrounded by a double-walled cup. That's a U there. A double-walled cup shaped structure called Bowman's capsule. That's an A there. Bowman's capsule. All right. And now the blood that enters the glomerulus is under pressure. All your arterial blood is under pressure. This pressure forces the fluid in the capillaries of the glomerulus through the walls of Bowman's capsule. And this process is the process of filtration. So as the blood in those capillaries moves through those membranes that makes up Bowman's capsule, that blood is being filtered. That's filtration, the filtration portion of urine production. So the blood cells and the blood proteins remain in the capillaries. And are therefore kept in the bloodstream. And then meanwhile, the water, salts, urea, amino acids, and glucose, that is to say the small stuff, that pass through the walls of Bowman's capsule So all of these fluids and small stuff that pass through the walls of Bowman's capsule then now form filtrate. And the filtrate enters the renal tubule. So I'm going to start drawing you a picture here. I'm going to use most of the board for it, so you can write that down while I erase this. All right. So here is the first part of my drawing you a nephron. So this is strictly diagrammatic, but I think it'll help get you where you need to go. So over here, I'm using red for blood. And what we have here, then, that is the renal artery. And off of the renal artery, we then have an arteriole. Here's the arteriole. How do I want to do this? Well, I'm just going to make another little arrow here. So that then is the arteriole there. This is not to scale. This is just a diagram. But the point is, it forms a little tightly balled up capillary bed here. So this, then, that is the glomerulus. And then surrounding the glomerulus, we have this double-walled, cup-shaped structure there, and that is Bowman's capsule. And then what happens is that we have the renal tubule coming out of Bowman's capsule. I'm leaving out a lot of details of the convolutions of this tube here. But the point is, and I'm also not drawing it to scale, but here, then, you have the renal tubule. And the renal tubule then goes up for a bit. Here we are, it keeps being the renal tubule. So it goes down. And there's a bunch of convolutions here that I am not bothering with. But what you have is this long hairpin-shaped loop right here. So this then is the loop of Henle, still a part of the renal tubule. This is where things start getting a bit complicated. So the renal tubule, it's not intersecting this, it's merely going this way, roughly speaking, like so. And eventually the renal tubule will connect up with a bigger tube that will also be collecting urine from other renal tubules, which I'm kind of symbolizing this way, like so. Here we go. And this big tube here is the collecting duct leading to the renal pelvis. So what happens is this. Let us, so we have blood going in, and then I'm going to use green and purple for the various things in the blood. So we have blood coming in here. That blood gets filtered. The red blood cells get filtered out. The plasma proteins get filtered out. And then in here, we have this fluid called filtrate. So here we have filtrate. All right, and I'm doing it in two different colors because the filtrate then consists, I will even do it this way, although it's all one fluid, I'm sure you understand that, but here we have, here we have filtrate within the renal tubule. There. So here's this fluid. The fluid is made up of things we're trying to get rid of and things we're trying to keep. So what happens then is that as this passes through the renal tubule, what's going to happen is, here we are going through, and what happens as the filtrate passes through the renal tubule is that the stuff that we want to keep, which I have indicated in purple here, the stuff that we want to keep gets reabsorbed back into your blood. There are blood vessels all around this renal tubule, and these blood vessels are then reabsorbing the good stuff back into the blood. I'll draw the blood vessels in another lecture. But my point is, for the time being, that as the good stuff gets reabsorbed, you wind up with less and less good stuff in there and a greater and greater preponderance of the waste materials, until finally what you have left in the renal tubule is just urine. So there we have urine at the end of the renal tubule. So what started out as filtrate eventually had all the good stuff removed, and what you ended up with in the end was urine. And the urine entered the collecting duct, and urine then came from other renal tubules, till you wound up with quite a bit of urine in the collecting duct. So here is the urine, lots of urine now in the collecting duct, heading off to the renal pelvis. Of course, in the renal pelvis, it will then pass through the renal pelvis to the ureter, right? To the urinary bladder, and then to the urethra, and then you'll be rid of it. So that then is part one of this lecture on the nephron.